Good morning everyone, I hope you can see me. It's still quite dark. Welcome back to my channel. Yes, it's dark even though it's about 45 minutes past sunrise. There's no sign of the sun, very thick clouds, which is rather unusual. It's also quite chilly, about 16 degrees with a bit of wind, which I think comes straight from the ocean that is about 70 kilometers away. I'm not planning on a sunrise obviously this morning, but what I am planning on doing is exploring a new area. Where I am at the moment, I haven't explored this area before. I am taking along a macro lens because I can see that there are lots of interesting macro subjects here which are perfect to shoot when the light is quite soft like this. Mostly rocks, rock formations, lots of lichen, different colors on both the trees and the rocks. And what else we'll find, who knows, maybe the odd little wildflower. Let's see what we can find today. Thanks for joining me, much appreciated. And let's go hunt for some interesting images. Well, here we have the first composition of the morning. Tiny bone fragment actually lying on the ground. What I like about it is the contrast between the white sun-baked bone and then the reddish sand, which is actually quite interesting. I've got no idea where the bone comes from. It's very weathered, so it's quite old. It's probably from some small mammal. I might actually take it home and stick it under the microscope and have a look to see if I can get some even finer detail at higher magnifications. But yes, good start to the morning, and be a focus stack image, shooting it at f14, and I need about 5 images I think to get the whole thing in focus. Nice find, very different. Here we have the images captured. As you can see, lots of very fine detail, tiny little cracks on the surface of this piece of bone. I think the texture is really interesting. Also the shape, the line specifically at the top, it moves from the right hand to the left hand, and then it's got that little curved semicircle at the top that kind of throws the eye back into the image. But primarily I think the interesting thing here is the texture, the very fine cracks. Nice capture, maybe not a portfolio shot, but something worthwhile keeping and capturing. Well, here I found a nice piece of very delicate lichen. Very fine texture. Normally it's they have like curly bits that stick up. This is totally flat on the rock, so I'm going to try and capture this at 1:1. It's still very fine. You actually need a better than a 1:1 macro, maybe something like my MP65, the Canon lens. It'll go at 5:1. But I'll take this photo. At least I've got enough megapixels. Maybe end up cropping it a bit. But I think it's a nice find. I will be doing a focus stack with it. Probably need about 4 or 5 images. Let's see what we can do. Okay, we'll be shooting at f14, 2-second exposures. Probably need about 5 of them for the depth of field. Using manual focus with a focus assist on the Sony works quite well. You can see exactly what part of the image is in focus. Even in relatively low light, that works quite well. Okay, that should do it. Hopefully once I get this in the computer, it's something that is really beautiful. Well, here we have the image after I've stacked it. As you can see, very fine detail, tiny little shell type structures, quite interesting. From a distance it almost looks like sandpaper, but it's actually quite beautiful. And they seem to cover quite a few rocks around here. I think when they get wet, it'll be interesting to see, because they'll normally swell up a bit and change the color, normally to a more greenish color. But interesting capture. Ended up stacking 5 images in Helicon focus. I've now climbed up a rocky ridge, not very high, probably elevation gain of about 50 meters or so, but I found a rather interesting long rock formation here that actually sticks out of the ground, probably volcanic. Of course there's some interesting lichen on it that I will shoot, but I think towards the middle of winter when the sun has moved. This might be a nice location for a sunrise shoot, landscape shot. It's also a very nice tree or two here. That'll add to the interest and some foreground interest. But talking about foreground interest, there must be some predator animal around here. Lots of bones on the ground, lots of pieces of fur, different species. So something is catching something around here. The main plan here is not to be on the menu for today, but it's probably a small predator like a jackal or something. So I'll just keep an eye out. Maybe it's denners around here. That would be interesting. Well, I found some more interesting lichens, at least 3 different species here. One is it almost looks like something that should come out of the ocean growth, tiny little shells almost. And then there's a very orangey yellow one that sits flat on the rock. And then I've also seen the normal one that I've seen even on my property, the one with curly leaves. So I'll shoot those. They're all here on this rock formation that I just mentioned. And there's a very definite smell here of an animal. So I'm pretty sure I'll explore just now, but maybe there's somewhere on this rocky ridge there's a den, or a jackal den or something like that. I quite like this lichen that's growing here on the rock. It's a very different from the normal lichens. As you can see, it's got tiny little round bubbles almost reminds me of shells. This is more something that you would see in a tide pool. But yes, we're 70 kilometers away from the ocean, so maybe this was a tide pool millions of years ago. I ended up stacking 9 images to get this final result. You see a beautiful contrast between the grayish white shells and the little black pieces in it. Not sure what is causing the black. I also just lifted changed the color temperature a bit. It was a bit cold, so the colors on the rocks behind it is now what I saw with my eyes. Quite happy with the image. Maybe it deserves also higher magnification. Maybe I'll try and shoot this at 5 times magnification sometime in the future. But overall, a nice image of an interesting subject. This is a rather unusually colorful lichen. Don't think I've seen one quite this color before. I've seen a reddish brown one, but those have a slight rough texture. This one is very smooth. It's almost like it's part of the rock, but if you look carefully, you see it's not a mineral. It's something that grows on the rock. I'll be doing probably about 6 or 7 image focus stack here, shooting at f14 around about 1.5 seconds. Quite an interesting composition I found. I'm shooting it with a macro lens, but it's almost not a macro image. I'm quite far away. I'm probably about 2 meters away from this tiny little dead tree. What I like about the composition is I've got those rocks in the foreground that anchor the image. Yeah, we're actually shooting at 16 by 9, so the final image will be a bit wider. So we'll see more of that. And then we've got this tree that actually has got a lot of character on it. It's got a very dark bark. And it bends over. It's obviously dead, or it appears to be dead. Bends over. It's like collapsed over onto the ground behind it, but it's still kind of trying to stay upright. Also from the bottom left corner, we've got all those dead roots that make a nice leading line onto the main trunk, that then guide your eye up towards the top of the image and then down again towards the right. Overall, quite an interesting image. Tiny. The whole tree is probably about 20 centimeters high, not even, maybe 18 centimeters, so it's relatively small. I'm going to have to shoot a focus stack here, but I think it'll be worthwhile. I'll shoot it, so I definitely don't want the background in focus. There's a big rock on the back. I don't want that in focus, so I'll make sure that I don't include the images in the focus stack where that is in focus. But let's see what we can capture here. The first image I shot here, I used f14, but I then realized that maybe I'm getting too much of the background into focus. So I'm going to do another focus stack, same composition, but I'll shoot it at f2.8 to make sure that even the deepest focus that I do on the back of the tree doesn't actually include the rocks in the back. Let's see if this works. Here is the image that I stacked after I stacked it using the f2.8 version of the sequence that I shot. I'm particularly happy with the composition. I love the miniature tree. I love the leading line from the bottom left-hand corner that takes you into the image, then up the tree. The tree then takes you down on the other side in a curve. The tiny little rock in the foreground is also a bonus. And I'm quite happy that I managed to exclude the background by not having it in focus, specifically the rock towards the right. I could maybe in the future try another shot at this by moving slightly right and excluding that rock completely. But as it is, I'm quite happy with the image, and I'm glad I made the effort to shoot it twice. Well, here we have another fascinating growth. Probably some lichen, I would assume. Looks like one. I've never seen this one before. It's slightly dusty. There's a bit of dirt on it. I suppose that's natural. But it's got a very fine texture, and I almost didn't see it because it's quite well camouflaged on the rock. I'm looking around to see if I can find a composition here, but there's nothing really that screams out at me. So I think I'm simply going to use this where I've got the line coming from the bottom right that does a curve, does a half circle towards the center and then down again towards the left hand side, or alternatively from the left hand side you've got the dark grey. It goes to the top and then forms a half circle towards the bottom. But I think here the main interest is the actual texture on the lichen. I'll have to focus stack this. I'll shoot it at f14 probably, or maybe f11 I think, for sharpness, and then probably need about 7 or 8 shots to get the focus right. Here we have the image as stacked. Initially the original image, the full size. I'll just show you the slightly zoomed in version as well. I really do like the composition, the half circle that starts bottom right and ends up in the middle, and then there's another circle mimicking on the left hand side. The very fine texture, which almost looks like tiny little hairs, also make the image quite interesting. The colors are interesting as well. The grayish growth, and then the rock behind it that is a slightly orangey, rusty color. As you can see here, here's the more zoomed in version, showing you just some more detail of the actual lichen growing. Interesting plant, or interesting in the form of life, and I enjoyed the image. Even the composition worked. I normally struggle with these abstract compositions. Here's another rock formation I quite like. I might have to move around a bit to see how best to use it in a composition, but I've never been able to resist a nice rock formation. You can probably hear in the background the birds. Just being out here in nature, even though I'm not producing any major images this morning, is just absolutely beautiful on this cloudy day. Okay, here I am back at home, and as promised I'm going to show you how I process my macro images, specifically how I do the focus stacking, and how I also create the 3D video clips that I sometimes use. What I've done here, I've imported the raw files into Lightroom, and I've selected one of the images specifically that I want to show you how to process it. I selected this image specifically because I believe it'll work well as a 3D object as well. Normally, if it's just a normal still image that I'm interested in, I would actually process the images directly in the stacking software. It'll read the raw files quite fine. Once you've done the stacking and you're happy with that, you can actually save it as a TIFF file, then import it into Lightroom or whatever your developing software is of choice, and then process it from there. But because I'm interested in creating a 3D video clip, it's important to first at least get the images so that the white balance is right, the colors are right, the histogram is right, and so on. Because once you've made the video clip, it's very difficult to do that. So what I've done with these images, I've selected them all, and on the very first image, what I do is I actually make sure the histogram's right. I changed the white balance a bit. It was a bit cold. I made sure the sharpening is right. There's no noise, no issues. Once I've done that on one image, because the images are basically all the same, you only need to do it in one image. Then you go to sync, and I just basically synchronize the images. What that does is it applies those parameters to all of them. Once I've done that, it's as simple as actually exporting the files. I normally put them in their own folder, like LR1 in this case. I specifically export as TIFF, no compression, and color space not that important, but I normally use Adobe RGB. Once they've exported, you've now got your collection of TIFF files. I open the software that I use to stack. I use a software called Helicon Focus. Helicon Focus there are many different pieces of software that will do this. I've just been using this one for a very long time. Also for microscope photos, where often you would stack 200 or 300 images there, and this is quite fast and efficient. So what do you do here? You simply open the images. I go and select the folder where they are, and I select all my TIFF files. It'll then open these files. You'll see on the right hand side it shows you the list of files, and it'll show you the first file here. You can actually step through the files and have a look at them. I'll show you later on when we do the stack with that tiny little tree, that sometimes you don't want to stack all the images. In that case, I only want the images that doesn't include the background. But in this case, I'm happy to stack all the images. You've got a couple of different methods that you can use for stacking. Method A, B, and C. One uses a weighted average. Then the default is a depth map. I prefer the depth map. Simply, first of all, it gives me great results. But also, I think it works better for the 3D image because it uses that depth map to create the 3D image. And then there's a pyramid as well, very similar. You can change some of the parameters here, like how much smoothing you want, the radius, that it'll actually look at the individual pixels. I find the defaults work pretty well. Once you're happy with this, it's as simple as actually saying render. Now, what it'll do here in the left-hand window, it actually shows you the image that it's selected, the specific image that it is on at that moment. It'll step through the images. As you can see, they go out of focus. Once it's stepped through them, it'll actually build a map, a mask, and then it'll actually stack those images according to the mask. As you can see, here's the stacked image now, compared to, let's look at some of the images on the left-hand side. That one, for example, there's a lot out of focus. Only the very background, some of the rocks are in focus, but you can see the stacked image is fine. You can do some retouching here. You can play with the edges. Sometimes you want to get rid of tiny artifacts. For images like these, that's very seldom necessary. You can also add some text, some descriptions. That would be nice if you want to circle something and say, that's the nervous system of the insect or something like that. Normally, all I do at this point is I would actually save the image. First of all, I'll save a TIFF file. It actually gives a name. It gives you a date, and more importantly, it gives you those parameters that it was created with, the radius and the smoothing and so on. So I think it's nice to keep those parameters as part of the file name. It's nice for future reference. So simple as saving the file. It takes a little while. It's quite a large file. As you would know, TIFF files are quite huge. These TIFF files would be about 240, 250 meg, something like that. Once it is saved, we can then look at the 3D side of it. There are a couple of different things you can do. You can create animations and depth maps and so on. But what I'm really interested in is the 3D model that will export. What it does is it uses the data that it's gathered while creating the stack, and it uses that to create a model that it can actually twist in real time. Normally quite a beautiful result, like in this case. It actually shows you so much 3D depth. It's beautiful. You can change the zoom. You can zoom in and out of the image. You can change how fast it rotates it. You can change rotation angle. You can also enhance the depth, or you just keep it by the default of about 30, 35. I think gives good results. Once you've done all that, you can also select the quality. I normally go for high quality. Highest quality and high quality, even at 4K video, it's not much difference. You can then go and save the file. Now the important thing here is you can select the resolution. Obviously, I want to save it at 4K, at nice high resolution. And you can save it in stereo if you want to create a stereo type effect. I'm not really interested in that in this particular. And I want to save the video. I just don't want to save the snapshot. I want to save the video. Now here you can say how many revolutions it must do. and frames per second. So what I do is I would normally put that on the frames per second on 25 or 24, depending on what I normally use. And I would want more than one revolution. You can always cut the video later. I would probably use 5 revolutions. Then it'll show you the same repeating revolutions in a loop. So let's save it. And again, it'll ask you where you want to save it. I would normally just, as a matter of interest, save it with the rest of the images, so at least you know where to find them. So I would stick them in the 3D folder and save it. It'll now actually create the video, build the video. You'll see the actual video animation now stops, and it'll create a video that is hopefully usable. You can then import it into your editing software, Adobe Premiere, or I use DaVinci Studio, and you can then integrate it into your main video. The next image I want to process is the one of the little tree, specifically the version that I shot at f2.8, because I want to make sure that I do not get the background into focus. So what I've done here in Lightroom, I've selected the 9 images that I shot in that sequence, and I've got the first one selected. The first image is shown. Overall, the image seems quite fine. Only thing I really need to do is maybe the histogram is a bit far to the left, so I'm just moving it slightly to the right, making sure that it's a nice even exposure. White balance seems to be fine, everything else seems to be fine, so I'll just synchronize that slight change to all the other images, and then I will process them and create a TIFF files like in the previous image. To save time, I've already done that. Okay, then in Helicon Focus, what I'll do is I'm going to open those 9 files, specifically the TIFFs that I've just generated. There they are. Select all 9 of them and open them up. It's going to take a few seconds because those are quite huge files, being TIFF files. And what you'll see is the first file is selected here. You see, as I step through the files, you'll see the focus will slightly move back. The second file, the focus is a bit further back. The next one, it's even further back. What I want to do is I want to make sure I'm not selecting any files where the focus is already too far back. I just want to get the very back of the tree in focus and nothing more than that. It appears that I can probably go one more file. Let's just see what that looks like. No. This is too far already. I can see that the rock in the back's already in focus. What I'm going to do is all the files from here I'm going to deselect, so we won't be using them in this particular stack. I'll again use the depth map method, and I'm just going to render these files. See how quickly it renders them. It creates the mask, and there's the final image, which seems to be quite fine. The background is nicely out of focus. The leading lines are fine. The foreground is absolutely crisp, and so is the tree itself. So all I need to do, I'm not going to try and do this one 3D. Subjects like trees and so on don't work very well in 3D unless you take photos from the backside as well. So I'm just going to save a TIFF file for this, in case I want to reprocess or do some more processing in Lightroom maybe. One more file that I think that I need to do, I would like to do, is one of the ones where the lichens are on one of those rocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm just cleaning up Helicon, and then I'm going to select again in Lightroom, see which files I'm looking at. I'm specifically interested in this set. I think this is quite a nice image as well, and this thing will also work quite well in 3D. Again, very little to be done, I think. Just make sure that the histogram is nice and evenly spread. No need to sharpen any further. The noise reduction seems to be fine. I will again sync these images and then just export them as TIFF files again. Once the export is complete, I will pull them into, or open them up into Helicon again. Here they are. Select all the files, open them up. In this case, I'm not really interested in, or not worried about the depth of field going all the way to the back, so I'm just going to stack all the files using the normal depth map method again. Works well. You'll see left-hand side is the current image that is in use, and the right-hand side is the result. It's slowly but surely creating a map, and as it goes along, it uses this map to create a mask, and once it's got the mask, it'll then actually combine the images into one final TIFF file, or one final image. It can then be saved as a TIFF file. It's quite busy. These are 42 megapixel images, so it takes quite a while to process them, and being TIFF files as well, they're about 245 meg odd each. But the map is almost complete. It'll now do the reverse building of the mask. You can see the mask, the first level is done. It's running through the levels, still showing the original image on the left-hand side as it uses them. And there's the product, nice and sharp all the way through. I'm going to just save that as a TIFF for later processing. And once the save is complete, I'm going to render this, create a 3D image, which I think would be quite a nice one because there's quite a bit of depth. Because towards the bottom left, the rock actually moves away from the camera. It's further away from the camera, so that should be quite interesting. Let's have a look at what it looks like in 3D. Absolutely beautiful. Beautiful 3D image. I'm happy with this. I'm not going to change any of the parameters. I think it is perfect as it is, so I'm going to just save it as a video. 4K video, I'll probably want about 5 loops, and I want 25 frames per second. It should be fine. And then what I'll do is I'm going to save this, and once it is saved, the saving part is not very interesting. I will show you the final result. Okay, the final image that I want to actually edit here and stack is the one with the yellow lichen, the very smooth one. It's also quite interesting being on the edge of a rock. So I'm also going to try 3D on here. I'm not sure how effective it will be, but it's worth a try. Little to be done to the image out of the camera. Again, slightly underexposed. I will just make sure it's exposed using the full dynamic range. I don't think I'm going to even touch the yellow. I was tempted to make the yellow a bit lighter, but I think that's fine. Nothing else I need to do in Lightroom at this point. So synchronize the files, and then I'll export them as TIFF files so that I can import them into Helicon Focus. Okay, I'm not going to actually export them. I've already done that. It takes a bit long for the purposes of this. So in Helicon Focus, I'm going to open those images. Where are they? There they are. All of them. Open them up. Again, 9 images. I seem to be consistent in stacking in 9. It's not on purpose. I just normally work the scene from front to back, trying to get everything into focus. I think I'm going to just do the normal stacking here. Nothing special needed. I'm a bit worried about the bottom left-hand corner. It's quite dark, but maybe we don't really need to lighten it up. I can always maybe do that later in Lightroom for the normal image, but it's too late to do anything now for that in terms of the video, in terms of the 3D video. But I think it'll be fine if it's dark like that. Let's render it, see what it looks like. Left hand side again, the original image, you can see as it's stepping through them, and on the right hand it's building the depth map. Different focuses are different shades of black, grey to white. It's reached the bottom one. Now it's busy building the mask. The mask is done. There's the stacked image. Beautiful. And there's actually quite a bit of detail on the bottom left-hand corner there. I think that's quite pretty. So I think nothing else needs to be done here. I'm not going to try and retouch the image. I'm just going to save it as a TIFF. Using the default file name is fine. In case I want to later edit that in Lightroom or Photoshop or anything else. Once this save is complete, I'm going to do the 3D. We'll see what the 3D model looks like. It might be interesting with quite a large difference between the top right-hand corner and the bottom left-hand corner. Here comes the 3D model. Oh, and that's actually quite pretty. Look at all the detail that is visible, both on the lichen and on the rocks in what is the relatively dark bit. It's quite pretty. So save the file as a TIFF file. That I've already done. So I'm going to save the video again, 4K video. Give it at least 5 loops in the video, just for interest sake. So 7.5 and 25 frames per second works for me. It does save it in a MP4 format. You can select other formats. Well, you can't really select other formats, but you can convert to other formats if needed. So there it is. Simple. Stacking is very easy with Helicon Focus. Of course, you can do it with layer masks in Photoshop as well. But this is far more efficient. Plus, it gives you the ability to do the 3D. I've tried the stacking with masks for some of my microscope photos, but even with a 64 128 gig machine, when you get to about 100 images, there's no way you can actually stack them in Photoshop. You just run out of memory. It gets so slow it's not usable, whereas Helicon handles it quite nicely. Not a problem. Well, I think that's pretty much it for this morning. I had quite an interesting little expedition here, but I can hear breakfast calling. I managed to find quite a few compositions I think that would be useful in the future with better light. I'm glad I came to explore this area. It's probably about 2 kilometers away from where I normally shoot, or where I should say where I do a lot of my shooting. But very different vegetation, and the rock formations are also a bit different. So it's definitely worthwhile coming back here. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me on the adventure. Hope you enjoyed the images. If you did enjoy the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Look in the description below for a link to my website and also to my Facebook page. And if you're interested in prints of any of my images, please contact me direct. I do limited edition serialized signed prints, fine art prints. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day and hope to see you soon. Cheerio.